Do you know there is a statement in the Bible that has caused millions of people to misunderstand marriage? People think, as long as there is a reason, they can walk away. But the truth is, the problem is not the reason. It is what they never understood from the very beginning. And when you understand this, you will begin to see love, marriage, and even your own wounds in a completely different way. But to understand that, we have to go back to where everything began, from the very beginning, before society existed, before laws existed, before culture existed. Marriage already existed. Not because humans needed it, but because God designed it. And that means marriage is not something that can be redefined by human opinion. It is not something that can change with trends. It is not something that can be updated with time, because a design always comes with fixed principles. And when you break those principles, the consequences are unavoidable. Think about this. If you had a machine, but you never read the instructions, you don't understand how it works. You just use it based on feelings. What do you think would happen? At first, it might still run. It might seem fine. But over time, it will begin to break down. Not because the machine is flawed, but because you used it the wrong way. Marriage is the same. So many people enter marriage with so much hope. They think, finally, I will be happy. Finally, someone will understand me. Finally, I won't be alone anymore. But what they don't realize is they are placing the weight of their entire life onto another human being, and no human being that can carry that. Marriage is not a place where you go to find happiness. It is a place where you learn how to love, and learning to love is not easy. It requires sacrifice, patience, maturity, the very things no one really wants when they fall in love. They want emotion, they want romance, they want the feeling of being loved, but they don't want the hard parts, the difficult conversations, the uncomfortable silence, the moments you have to apologize when your ego doesn't want to, the moments you have to forgive when your heart is still hurting. And that is why marriage is not just a relationship. It is a transformation process, a process that breaks your ego, a process that softens your heart, a process that teaches you how to love another person, not the way you want, but the way they need. And that is why marriage is called a covenant, not a contract. A contract says, if you don't fulfill your part, I have the right to leave. But a covenant says, even when you are not perfect, I will stay. And this goes completely against the way the world thinks today. Because the world says, put yourself first. Protect your feelings. Leave if you're no longer happy. But a covenant does not begin with the question, what do I get? It begins with the question, what am I willing to give? And that is the point so many people miss. They enter marriage with a mindset of receiving. But marriage was designed for giving. But if marriage is designed so clearly, if the principles existed from the beginning, then why do so many people start with hope and end in brokenness? The truth is, the problem does not begin when the relationship starts to fall apart. It begins in the way we enter love. Today, people do not love with a covenant mindset. They love with a consumer mindset. They look at a relationship the same way they look at a product. Is this person right for me? Do they meet my needs? Do they make me happy? And when the answer is yeah, they stay. When the answer is no, they leave. It sounds logical, it feels reasonable, but it turns love into a transaction, an exchange, something conditional. And when love becomes a transaction, it is no longer love. It becomes a temporary arrangement. You give in order to receive. You stay ally as long as you benefit. But the problem is life doesn't work that way. There will be days when you receive nothing. There will be moments when you give and nothing comes back. There will be seasons when you feel like you are the only one trying. And if you don't understand the nature of a covenant, you will begin to think, "This isn't fair. I deserve something better. I shouldn't have to endure this." And from that moment, a small shift begins to happen. You start seeing the other person differently. You begin to notice their flaws and more than their goodness. You begin to focus on what you don't have instead of what you already had. And over time, the way you see will shape the way you feel. The way you feel will shape the way you act, and the way you act will reshape the entire relationship. You are no longer patient. You no longer listen. You no longer try to understand. You simply react. And when two people are only reacting instead of understanding, the relationship begins to break. Not through one big moment, but through hundreds of small ones. A word left unspoken, a feeling never shared, a moment of silence instead of connection. And then, one day, you realize that the person next to you has become a stranger. Not because they completely changed, but because the connection has disappeared, and in that emptiness, a thought begins to grow. At first, it is very small, almost unnoticeable, but it is persistent. It repeats, it whispers, "Maybe this is not where I belong. Maybe there is something better out there. Maybe I chose the wrong person." And that thought, if it is not confronted, will become a belief. And once a belief is formed, it begins to shape every decision you make. You'll start to distance yourself. You start to withdraw. You start to close off. Not all at once, but little by little. You leave in your mind first, and then later you leave in reality. And this is the moment when a phrase in the Bible becomes incredibly important. A phrase that doesn't just describe behavior, but describes the condition of the heart. A heart that once loved, once hoped, once trusted, but over time became tired, became guarded, and eventually completely closed. A hardened heart. And this is where that phrase in the Bible becomes deeply important. A phrase, not just to understand, but to help you look back at yourself. A hardened heart. Hardened does not mean you have no emotions. It does not mean you no longer know how to love. It means you once loved, but you became tired. You once tried, but you were disappointed. You once hoped, but you were hurt. And over time, you began to tell yourself, "Enough." You no longer want to argue, no longer want to explain, no longer want to prove that you are right, no longer want to try to hold on to something that feels like only you are holding. And so, you choose silence. But that is not peace. It is giving up. You are still there, but your heart has withdrawn. You still talk, but not honestly. You still smile, but you no longer feel. And the most dangerous part is, you begin to feel like this is normal. You convince yourself, maybe everyone ends up like this. Maybe every marriage becomes this. Maybe love always fades. But no, that is not the truth. That is when your heart has closed. And when the heart closes, every relationship begins to die. Not all at once, but little by little. One day you stop texting. One day you stop asking how they are. One day, you stop caring. And then, one day, you look at the person next to you and realize you feel nothing anymore. Not because they changed, but because you stopped opening your heart a long time ago. And this is not just a concept. It is a process that happens quietly in everyday life. There was a woman who once believed she had found the right person. That man was not perfect, but he was good enough. He cared, he listened, he made her feel loved. In the early years, everything was beautiful. They could talk late into the night. They could laugh at the smallest things. They could look at each other without saying a word. But then, life began to change. Work, pressure, responsibilities, exhaustion. Conversations grew shorter. Messages became fewer. Hugs became rushed. There was no big event, no betrayal, no explosive arguments. It was just everything slowly became silent. She began to feel alone inside her own relationship. She tried to speak. She tried to explain. She tried to be understood. But every time she opened up, he would reply, "I'm busy. I'm tired. Don't make things complicated." And after many times like that, she stopped talking. Not because she was okay, but because she no longer believed that speaking up would change anything. And that was when her heart began to close. She still played her role as a wife, still cared, still stayed. But inside, she had already left. And then, one day, when the man finally realized something was wrong, he turned back and asked, "What's wrong with you?" But by then, it was too late. Not because she didn't want to come back, but because she no longer felt anything. And that story is not rare. It is happening in many places, to many people. And that is why you need to understand something very important. A relationship doesn't collapse because of one big moment. It collapses because of hundreds, thousands of small moments that were ignored. You don't lose connection in a single day. You lose it little by little. Every time you don't listen, a piece of connection is lost. Every time you don't care, a piece of emotion is lost. Every time you choose silence instead of facing things, a piece of trust is lost. And then, one day, you look back and don't understand how everything became this way. But the truth is, it didn't happen suddenly. It happened day by day, little by little, moment by moment, without you noticing. And to understand that more deeply, we must go back to a story. Very old, yet very real. There was a woman. She came to a well at noon, not because it was the best time, but because that was when no one else was there. She didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to be seen, didn't want to be asked, because her life had too many questions. She couldn't answer. She had gone through many relationships. Each time, she thought, this time will be different. But then, it ended again. Not because she didn't try, but because no one could give her what she truly needed. A feeling of being accepted, of being loved without judgment, of being seen without being evaluated. And then, on an ordinary day, in a very ordinary place, she met God. No great miracle, no crowd, just a conversation. And in that conversation, for the first time, someone truly saw her. Not just her actions, not just her past, but her heart. And that was when she realized the thirst within her was not the absence of a person, but the absence of something that no human being could ever fill. And that is exactly where so many people misunderstand love. Because when you look for a person to fill a space that only God can fill, you will always be disappointed. And that is why so many relationships begin with hope but end in emptiness. But the question is, if it's not another person, then what can truly heal you? And the answer is not simple, but it will change the way you love forever. But the question remains, if it's not another person, then what can truly heal you? And the answer is not simple, but if you understand it, it will change the way you love forever. Many people enter a relationship with a belief that is beautiful, but also dangerous. They believe, this person will make me happy. This person will understand me without me having to speak. This person will be there whenever I need. And even deeper, they believe, this person will heal me, will fill the emptiness they don't understand, will soothe the pain they cannot name, will repair what was once broken inside them. But the truth is, no human being can carry that. Not because they are weak, not because they don't love you enough, but because they were not created to be your answer. And when you place an expectation greater than what a human can bear, you don't just set them up to fail, you also cause yourself to shatter. You begin with hope, then it turns into expectation, then into demand, and finally into disappointment. And the dangerous part is that process is very quiet. Imagine a container inside you that is empty. You don't see it, but you feel it every time you are alone, every time you feel not enough, every time you ask yourself, am I worthy of love? And then, when you meet someone who makes you feel better, you think, this is it. This person will fill me. And you begin to pour all your hope into them. You want them to always text first, to always care first, to always understand first. You want them to read your mind without you having to say a word. But then, it only takes one day and when they're tired, just one moment when they don't pay attention, just one instance when they don't respond the way you expected, and you begin to feel empty again. And this time, it hurts more, because you had hoped. And that's when the cycle begins. You feel lacking. You demand more. You demand more. They feel pressure. They feel pressure. They begin to withdraw. They withdraw. You feel abandoned. You feel abandoned. You demand even more. And so it goes. A cycle with no end. Neither of you is truly bad. Neither of you is completely wrong. But both of you are caught in a system neither of you understands. And that system is built on one thing, an inner lack. And the most painful part is, you are not just loving someone. You are trying to escape yourself. You don't just want them to stay. You are afraid that if they leave, you will have to face the emptiness inside you. And that is why you cling, you control, you worry, you fear, not because you are weak, but because you are not healed yet. And here is the truth that very few people want to hear. If you are not healed, you will carry your pain into every relationship, and you will continue to repeat the same story with different people. But this is not the end. The turning point does not come when you meet the right person. It comes when you stop, truly stop. No searching, no running away, no filling the void with busyness. Just being alone. And for the first time, you begin to ask, what am I lacking? What am I afraid of? What am I trying to fill with other people? And that is a very difficult moment, because there's no one left to blame, only you and the truth. And from there, a new journey begins. Healing is not a moment. It is a process of learning how to be alone without feeling lonely, be in silence without feeling empty, look at yourself without wanting to run away. You begin to understand your worth does not come from someone choosing you, but comes from the fact that you were created with value. You begin to understand love is not something you have to earn. It is something you have been given. And when you realize that, the empty container inside you is no longer empty. It begins to be filled from within. And when you are no longer lacking, everything changes. You no longer love to be filled. You love because you are already full. You no longer enter a relationship with the question, what will this person give me? You enter with the question, what can I bring? You no longer control. You no longer demand. You no longer fear. Because you are no longer dependent. Love at this point is no longer a necessity. It becomes a choice, a free choice, a mature choice, a choice repeated every day. And that is when marriage returns to its true meaning. Marriage is no longer a place where two lacking people try to fill each other. It becomes a place where two people who have been healed come together to build something greater. But the final question is, how do you maintain a love like this in a world that is always changing, always pressuring, and always pulling you back to who you used to be? And the answer lies in something very simple, but very few people truly live by. But the problem does not stop at understanding. It lies in whether you dare to look back at yourself or not. Because many people, when they hear these things, they think of others. They are the one who doesn't understand me. They are the one who hurt me. They are the one who changed. But very rarely do they stop and ask, what about me? The truth is, every broken relationship is never only one-sided. Maybe one person made more mistakes. Maybe one person was hurt more deeply. But there are always two people who gradually lost something, not in one day, not in one decision, but in hundreds, thousands of very small moments. One time not listening. One time ignoring each other's feelings. One time choosing silence instead of speaking honestly. One time holding on to hurt instead of forgiving. And little by little, the heart begins to close. Not because the love is gone, but because it is too exhausting to keep staying open. Do you know what the scariest thing is? Not arguing, not conflict, but silence. The silence. When two people no longer want to understand each other. The silence when you know there is a problem, but no longer have the energy to solve it. The silence when you sit next to each other, but feel more distant than ever. And in that silence, a space appears, a space that before was filled with connection. And when that space is not filled,
It will find a way to be filled somewhere else. It is not always another person. Sometimes it is work. Sometimes it is your phone.
Sometimes it is social media. Sometimes it is things that make you not have to face reality, and you begin to live a parallel life. On the outside, you are still a couple, but on the inside, you are living two separate lives. And that is when the relationship is no longer a relationship. It becomes a habit, but it is still not the end, because what is more dangerous is what happens after that. When a heart has been hurt too many times, it begins to do something very natural. It stops feeling, not because it cannot feel, but because it no longer wants to feel, because feeling means pain. And when you no longer want to feel pain, you begin to build walls. At first, that wall is very thin. You still have emotions, you still care, but you begin to hold back. You don't say everything you think. You don't share all your feelings. You begin to choose safety over honesty, and over time, that wall gets thicker. You are no longer easily hurt, but you also are no longer easy to love. You no longer feel as much pain, but you also no longer feel as much. And that is the price of overprotecting yourself. You protect yourself from pain, but at the same time, you also lock away your ability to love. And this is when a very difficult truth needs to be said. Many people think love can die, but in reality, love does not die. It is neglected. It is neglected when you no longer invest. It is neglected when you no longer care. It is neglected when you think things will fix themselves, but nothing fixes itself. Everything of value needs to be cared for. A garden, if not taken care of, will grow full of weeds. A body, if not taken care of, will become weak. And a relationship, if not nurtured, will slowly die. Not loudly, not dramatically, but little by little. And if you are still listening, you might be asking yourself, so, is there still hope? The answer is yes, but not in an easy way. Not just by having one conversation, and everything will be fine. Not just by saying sorry, and everything goes back to how it was. Because what was broken was not a single moment, but an entire process. And to rebuild, you also need a process of honesty, a process of daring to face what you have done wrong, a process of relearning how to listen, how to communicate, how to love. But the most important thing is you have to want it. Not just you alone, but both of you. Because one person trying cannot save a relationship of two. And if both people are willing, then something miraculous can happen. There are relationships that were once broken, but became stronger than ever, not because they had no problems, but because they went through those problems together. They learned how not only to love when things are easy, but to love when things are hard. They learned that true love is not a feeling, but a choice repeated every day, even when no one sees, even when there is no immediate reward. And that is the difference between a temporary relationship and a true covenant. And if you understand this, you will begin to see something very different, not in others, but within yourself. Marriage is not a place for you to escape loneliness. It is also not a place for you to find your worth.
Because if you enter marriage with an empty space inside, you will unconsciously ask the other person to fill that space. And when they cannot, you will be disappointed, you will be hurt, and you will think, maybe I chose the wrong person. But the truth is, no one can become the answer to what is inside you. Marriage is not a place for you to complete yourself. It is a place where you bring your true self into it and learn how to love within that truth. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Marriage between is where two people who have begun to understand themselves, who have begun to heal, who have begun to grow, choose to walk together.
Not because they need each other to survive, but because they choose each other to become better together. And when you understand that, you will no longer love in a rushed way. You will no longer stay just because you are afraid of being alone. You will no longer leave just because your feelings change. You will begin to love in a more mature way. To love not only when it is easy, but to love even when it is hard. To love not only when you feel like it, but to love because you have chosen to. And that is the difference between a temporary relationship and a true covenant. If you want to understand more deeply the stories in the Bible, not just to hear, but to change the way you live, subscribe to the channel Ancient Bible Stories, because there are very ancient stories, but they are speaking exactly about your life today. And maybe just one story is enough to change the way you love forever.